afternoon, everyone. Super excited to be here. I'm so glad to see a full audience for this very exciting conversation. My name is Aino Bergius. I'm CEO at Slush. And I'm super excited about the upcoming conversation, sharing the stage with these two superstar gentlemen who have been actually shaping the European startup ecosystem from two rather different perspectives, but definitely have the front row seat, but also shaping what we know as the European ecosystem today. So Ilkka, let's start with you. You're, of course, founded the Supercell, one of the most amazing European gaming companies, being the CEO since the very first day. But I would love to hear more about how has it been? How has it been 15 years ago as a founder from Finland, actually building something long-lasting?
Well, thanks for having us here. Well, if I start from a very beginning, so I started my career in entrepreneurship 25 years ago, and I remember it was year 2000 we founded our first games company, and back in those days, I would say that almost startups and the scene didn't frankly exist here. It was incredibly hard to raise financing. It was almost non-existent. VCs, the very few that we had would tell us that, okay, we don't actually invest into games, we only invest in technology, whatever that meant at the time. So it was very different. Then I remember the first Slush, it was back in 2008, maybe with 200 people. It was a great start, but very different. Maybe we had 10 people from abroad at that time, and we were very proud of that. Then fast forward to 2010, we founded Supercell. Actually, it was already way easier to raise money, mainly thanks to Rovio, who had just put out Angry Birds, and Finland has started to become famous for this great talent pool for games. So it actually was relatively easy for us in 2010 to raise money. But then I think the problem was that I remember in 2013 when Supercell got to scale, we got to more than $1 billion of annual revenue. There was actually very few entrepreneurs in Europe at that time who I could call for help and who had been into a similar situation. And then you fast forward today, it's entirely different. There's tens, if not hundreds of people I could call, in that situation, and so much more experience and just a fantastic momentum, and today is a great example of that.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear. And Neil, you have been the past 30 years backing the most exciting companies coming from Europe, but also globally. So what is something that you're seeing that how has the company building changed over the decades? You have seen and backing up European companies like Skype, Revolut, and of course Supercell. So what has changed on the company building, maybe the founder mentality, and what is still the same?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me here, and it's really an honor to share the stage with you, Ilkka. I've learned so much from working with entrepreneurs and particularly with Ilkka. I think that, look, when we started Index Ventures in 1996, we were kind of a pioneer. There were other venture firms, but none of them were really focused on the same long-term objective. We decided that there was no reason why you couldn't have world-class companies emerging anywhere, including the far-flung corners of Europe. We started it in Geneva, knowing that they certainly wouldn't be in Geneva, which is 200,000 people, but it was a great base to be able to go everywhere and find those companies. But we wanted to compete with kind of the best venture capital firms in the world because we felt like if we couldn't do that, we wouldn't succeed. Those were all in Silicon Valley. And if we were going to compete with Silicon Valley, we had to hunt far and wide for companies. The good news is, there were always entrepreneurs here. The bad news is, in those days, there was zero ecosystem. Just connecting with them, helping them raise money, but also knowing how to recruit, how to issue stock options, how to go public, and all the steps along the way. All of that was breaking new ground. But in only 30 years, things have changed really dramatically. I think the ambition of founders everywhere is ratcheted up massively, and actually there's no difference in the level of ambition of great entrepreneurs here or in Silicon Valley or anywhere. People can dare to achieve really ambitious goals, and there are examples of people who have actually done that, who are now available to give them advice and even capital. Plus, the ecosystem is completely developed. I mean, look at Slush. You know, it's incredible. I think there are still steps that we could do as Europe does, or mainly steps for regulators and for infrastructure. You know, incorporation, stock option plans, that kind of thing, taxation. But those things will happen in due course. But really, today, there's no limit to what can be built in Europe.
That's amazing. Ilkka, you mentioned like you have been there actually attending the very first Slush back in 2008 with a couple hundred people, only a few coming from abroad. Today we're here, 13,000 of us, hosting the largest gathering of venture capital. So it would be interesting to hear from your perspective. Neil a bit touched this topic already about like, okay, what next? What are you looking forward? What are you excited to see coming out of Europe? Where do you see that the potential lies next?
Well, I guess what I'm most excited about is this idea that if you think about Europe, like, I mean, no single country on its own can say compete with Silicon Valley. But if all of us Europeans, we work together, if you look at Europe as a sort of single market, we actually can very well compete with Silicon Valley in terms of the amount of talent and even in the amount of capital if we just allocate it, you know, to the tech companies, or more of it would be allocated to the tech companies. So what I'm super excited about this idea that the next phase of Europe will be like much tighter collaboration, you know, between founders, VCs, as we're going to build the next chapter of Europe, and you know, I'm extremely bullish about it. And as a one practical example, like right now, like there's a very tight like network of European founders who all like support each other, and they also like support the next wave of European founders. We invest to their companies, we give them advice, and we will help them to build way more valuable companies than we ever did.
Yeah, and I think like that's one of the most amazing things is that like actually like people who have done it go out there and share their advice, like knowing that actually founding and scaling a company is one of the hardest things that you can do. Like you have been there and now supporting the next generation of founders doing that.
Yeah, maybe I should also like add specifically what I'm excited about this initiative called EU.inc, which Neil and his team have been actually driving forces of, and this idea of like somehow like making it simpler to do business in Europe, you know, incorporating companies. You mentioned the taxation of stock options and those type of things, and if those type of initiatives go through, Europe will be incredibly strong when it comes to tech entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that. And it's actually no coincidence that we're all three sitting here, because like you have actually like, well, Neil has been shaping Supercell's story together with you, but Ilkka, something that you mentioned earlier, that it wasn't actually like maybe love at first sight type of a situation, rather than you needed to actually convince Index and Neil getting excited and hop on this crazy ride of Supercell journey. So can you share a bit about that?
Well, I'm happy to share. So it was year 2011, I believe, the very early parts of it, and you know, we were meeting. Actually, it was late 2010. We were meeting like different business angels and also VCs, and I actually didn't meet Neil at the time, but I met with one of his partners, and unfortunately I wasn't able to convince that partner to invest to Supercell at that time. But then we met again a little bit later when we were raising our Series C, and this time actually it was Neil in the meeting, and actually like huge kudos to the culture that Neil has at Index, because many sort of VCs might have been like it might have been too much for their ego to actually, you know, entertain the idea of investing to Supercell. But this time I was a lot more successful, and I got them to invest. And there's also a really interesting twist to the story that before we actually like got Index as our lead, we actually had another VC like who we had already signed a term sheet with, and they were supposed to be our lead. So we had the term sheet signed. And then these guys came in and they did sort of a due diligence of Supercell, and then they actually didn't like our new games pipeline, and therefore they decided to pull back. So they walked away from a term sheet, which is a very unusual thing to do, as many of you guys guys know. And I do remember my first interaction, or one of my first interactions with Neil was that I had to call him and say, hey, Neil, like actually we don't have a lead anymore for the round, and would you guys like to lead? And then I'm very, very grateful that then he sort of took the lead position, and my understanding is that he, rather than looking at the products, he was more looking at the people and the culture of the company.
And now Neil, hearing all these convincing and the crazy founder side of the story, like, what were you thinking? You met Ilkka, you saw the product, you heard about the company. Like after all these like maybe hesitations from the team, like what made you change your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think about what aspects of this story, because it's a while ago, but what is still relevant today. And I think a lot of it is, Ilkka mentioned that one of my partners had spoken to him about the prior round. And one of the things that I'm really proud of at Index and the culture that we have is that the success that we've had, the companies that have really made a mark, are very widely distributed among the partnership. Every partner has one or two companies to their name, that they shepherded as investors, and that's not by accident. That's by design. That's because we really believe that we're collectively capable of making better decisions than any one of us, that we all have something to bring, and that sometimes another partner needs to look at something because they may be somebody may be missing something, and that's what happened with my partner, and I decided that I would take a look at it this time. And I think that what was evident to me was that clearly the company had performed, so we had been objectively wrong about not investing in the last round, but the point was, why would you invest now? It was a 100% secondary round. That meant that the existing investors were the ones selling. So why would we be investing? And I think, we saw something different in the company at that point. We weren't investing in one game and modeling the metrics and saying, we think it'll do this, and there's an arbitrage between now and 3 years from now on this one game, and then some percentage probability that this next game will be a hit. I've said this before, but I think, if you're that good at measuring the metrics of a game and knowing where it's going, you should be starting a gaming company. You shouldn't be investing. Our job is to look at to back out a little bit and look at the ingredients of the company and what led it to be successful today and what was going to take it to the next level. And what we became pretty quickly convinced about was the culture that Ilkka had built at Supercell was really special and unique and differentiating, and was what we were betting would drive it to much, much greater levels of success in the future. So whether or not somebody else got cold feet because of the game, but we weren't looking at that. We were looking at something else.
By the way, that's the other thing that has changed since those days. So this was in 2013, and as Neil said, the round was pure secondary, and today it's nothing out of the ordinary. But that time it was actually quite special, and especially because everybody, all the employees, everyone had the right to participate in equal shares to that. And back that time, there was actually quite a lot of resistance in doing that, from certain investors. But I'm really, really proud that we can draw that through. And now, of course, lots of companies are doing the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I would love to dive a bit deeper into what Neil mentioned about the people and the culture. Of course, there is a lot of metrics that you need to follow, especially when you're doing a later round investment. But you mentioned that there was something so unique about the culture and the people that Ilkka and the team has been shaping. So can you specify more concretely, what did you see, and what are in general on all the time when you're looking out companies and thinking, should we actually partner up with them? What are the characteristics, what are the qualities that you're looking in people and the culture that make you believe that this might be the next generational company?
Yeah, I think this is something that's really central to the way we invest. It's not necessarily true for everybody, but we're very, very much focused on the entrepreneurs, the founders, what their objectives are, how they define their objectives, what's driving them, and what motivates them to do this. We're much less likely to find that in an investor who's looking at a specific metric or a number. I still cringe at the whole unicorn, decacorn thing, because I don't think any of those companies were built because the investors set out to hit that number. And if they did, that's trouble, because now what, right? So they have to be looking at something that is very, very ambitious, aspirational, and impossible to fully attain. That will drive them for many, many years. And then I think, the monetary success will be a byproduct of that, and everybody will do well, and the founders will do well, and the employees will do well, the investors will do well. But we're really looking at big market opportunities, because you're not going to run out of runway, and the right founders. And then we want to make sure that there's a good explanation for why this founder should win doing this thing. They shouldn't just have had a spreadsheet and looked at different opportunities and picked this one because it was unoccupied. Mm-hmm. It really should come from something deeper that they're not going to run out of. And that's, I think, what we found in Ilkka, in the culture that he had built. And this is super important when things are hard, because you still need to dig deep, and people need to ask themselves, what am I doing in this place? This may never work. But it's even more important when things go well. Because then what? Like, why do we drive to the next level? They've achieved all of, they've paid back their mortgage, they own their house, they're able to take their family on vacation, or then what? There needs to be something that is really, really a magnet to pull them forward.
Definitely. I would love to hear, Ilkka, on your perspective, like based on everything that Neil just described, what makes a great culture in a great days and a bad days. And Supercell is known for its very unique culture, it's always praised. So I would love to hear from your perspective, was it something that you were like, okay, now I found the gaming company, this is the roadmap, this is the culture that we're building. Was it super intentional? And of course, from the day one to very today, the culture changes, it shapes as the company scales. So what did you think were the very most important cornerstones of the culture when you started and founded Supercell?
Yes, so it actually was very intentional. So you have to remember that when we founded Supercell, we were 6 co-founders, and each of us had been in the games business, 10 years, give or take, at that time. And in many ways, Supercell has been built on the learnings from the many, many failures that I and the others had done in their previous companies. And in a way, Supercell almost was almost a counter reaction to what we had seen go wrong before. So we wanted to build this company where, our dream was and still is to create these games that are remembered forever. And we believe that the way to get there is simply to be the best place for the best creative teams to build these games. And at the very core of Supercell culture, this idea of these independent cells, that's where the name of the company comes from. And it means that the game teams are completely in control of their own game. And no one from the top, not myself or nobody from a leadership team, can go and dictate what they should do. So that was the central pillar of the culture, and which still is very much true. And then how do you go about then scaling it? I think a couple of maybe thoughts about that. One is that and this was a big learning for me, and one of my biggest mistakes that I made is that I used to think that culture is something that is sort of set in stone and it never ever should change. And if somebody would tell me that, the culture has changed, I would think that it's a negative thing. But then later on, I've learned that actually as the company grows, as you learn more about the market, about what the company is, of course the culture must change, and it will change for the better. And that's been an extremely important learning for myself, and I guess for the entire Supercell. That you always have to keep on evolving the culture. The second point is that about culture is that you can write these culture memos and culture decks all day long, but they don't matter at all unless you really do what you say you would do. So it actually is the actions that matter. And culture is only words, but it's really the actions and the concrete behaviors. And I would say that the best ways to shape culture is to tie all the hardest decisions to the culture and the values. For example, as I said, our dream is to create these games that are remembered forever. So when our game teams has a game and they don't believe that it's going to be a game that would be remembered forever, then they will frankly kill it. And then whenever we're going to do that decision, we try to tie it to the culture and values. So that's one of the best ways to communicate about them.
Yeah, I think like that's amazing, especially once we're seeing like in this ever evolving world with new technology at hand. I think like the beauty and the core actually lies like culture evolves as new people come in. Actually, like the culture is the sum of the people who are building and scaling the company together. And now, well, already mentioned, Neil, like you have been like backing these most amazing companies over like the past 3 decades, and you have seen from the dot-com bubble to the mobile and now the wave of AI. So curious to also hear from your side is that like once we're talking about something as important as like building companies, like generational companies that last, like how do you think founders should or companies should like implement or take on these like new technologies to actually stay ahead of the curve? Because like whenever it's about culture, you need to keep evolving, but same comes to the product when there is new technology at hand. So how are you seeing like founders coping with these new like bubbles or waves of technologies?
Yeah, I mean, I think the culture will answer those questions. You know, that culture in a company will allow them to apprehend those new changes and decide what to do in a way that's true to their vision and to their strengths. I think the thing that doesn't change are the values and maybe the long-term aspirational objectives. So one thing I'd say is, you know, you want to make sure that those things are impossible to solve. You know, pick a big problem that will always be unsolved. You know, technology may help you, tools may help you eliminate certain cycles or bypass certain things, but that big problem is still there. I think you know, if a new advance kind of obviates the need for what you're doing, you need to think again and kind of reframe what you're doing in a bigger context. Yeah, and I think the thing about culture is I totally agree that it changes and it needs to change because the world around you changes, you grow, you're bringing in different people, you don't want to have everybody be the same. You on purpose want to stretch your culture. But I think it's really important to have an environment where people feel comfortable bringing their best ideas to the company every day and not going home and writing down in a little book the things that they're going to say for the day they start their own company. Because this is broken at this place, I'm going to do it differently. As soon as they start thinking that way, it's the beginning of the end. And your culture is failing because you're not absorbing those ideas into what you're doing and allowing the culture to kind of reinvent itself and readapt itself to the new environment.
Definitely. How about Ilkka, like seeing this on a very, very like concrete level, like now with new technology at hand, like AI eating the world, like how do you start like implementing in a world where you have like autonomous team, a lot of different type of cells, teams working independently? How then like you actually make sure that the game development takes actually this new technology into account and make sure that Supercell stays ahead of the curve?
Well, that's a great question, something that I actually spent quite a lot of time thinking about. And maybe just to share a story from early 2012, when Supercell had developed the early prototypes of Heyday and Clash of Clans. And I remember it was a game developers conference in San Francisco in 2012, and I had the early version of Clash of Clans in my tablet, iPad, and I was just showing it around to people who I kind of looked up to in those days, like, you know, mostly from PC and console gaming companies. And I would like hand over my iPad with a Clash of Clans on it, and the person would play for some time, and then that person would hand over the iPad back to me and just ask me this very simple question, which was the following: like, why would anybody play this game? And you know, it was pretty, of course, shocking because I really looked up to these people. But then what gave us a conviction to like continue on the course, because we were actually getting a lot of positive feedback from a focus group test and stuff like that. And I've been later on like thinking like, and then later on, of course, Clash of Clans became this mega hit. It just generated more than 10 billion in lifetime revenue and all that, way more than 1 billion downloads. And so why didn't these people see it coming? And I think the answer is that because it was something like so completely different. You know, it was a different type of platform, different type of business model. We were giving the game away for free, different type of user interface, and those type of things. So that was the experience back in 2012. Now fast forward today. So now my biggest nightmare is that I or somebody from Supercell, we meet a kind of young gaming entrepreneur, and they come with us with some kind of AI first game. And now they hand us the phone, and we play the game, and then we say like, okay, why would anybody play this game? So that's my biggest nightmare. And then what are we doing like for that not to like happen? Is that we founded, for example, what they call the AI labs, and then we have this thing called Supercell Spark. The AI labs are here in Helsinki, but also in San Francisco, and we're going to like establish them in other parts of the world as well. But the whole idea is that we're going to like bring in like also like external talent and fresh ideas, and who think differently. And at the same time, we are super lucky to have these like amazing developers at Supercell, and the one thing that we won't do is that we won't ever give a kind of top-down order that, oh, now you have to use AI, and if you don't use AI, you must leave the company. We would never ever do that. It's all about trust, and these people know exactly what's the best thing to do. But at the same time, we do want to bring in these like new, fresh ideas to the company through the initiatives like AI Lab and Spark.
That's amazing. Thank you, Ilkka, for sharing that. We're running out of time, but I still have one more question for you, because I know that there is actually a lot of early stage founders in the audience and many people who are doing this for the very first time, eagerly thinking, similar as you, like, okay, what do I do next? How do I build a generational company? Something that actually people will still enjoy using like decades from now. So what is like one piece of advice that you would give to the early stage founder in the audience? Maybe Ilkka, if you want to start.
Well, at least two pieces of advice. The first one, and the more important one, is start today. Do not start tomorrow. Start today. Start building, and don't like overthink it. Like don't get stuck in this idea that how I'm gonna build something that it's gonna be meaningful in 10 years. Start from like building something that's going to be super valuable to your users or to your customers today, and then and get there, and then you start to build from there. And if I think about Supercell, I mean, we had no idea like what would happen when we started building a company, but we were like frankly just we believed in certain things, and then we just lived it day by day, and we were like just focused on like working and enjoying like what we were doing. And then of course we were like extremely lucky also, and then that led to this success. But we definitely didn't see it coming.
Anything you want to add on, Neil?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great advice. I think that it's difficult. I think it's a combination of being stubborn and being open-minded, and those things don't really come to the same person very often. But you want to be stubbornly have a lot of self-belief in what you're doing and not let people talk you out of it, because lots of people will try to talk you out of it. But at the same time, if there's data, if people can point you to something and they're trying to help you, then you should take that on and kind of work it back into your idea of your company. And then the other thing kind of aligns with what Ilkka is saying, like, don't be too precious about your idea. Expose it to the world. Let people play the game. Show it to people who you think will give you criticism. And then you can decide what you do with that. But don't avoid that kind of moment of truth. And if you do that, the idea may pivot, may evolve, but you'll benefit from that.
That's amazing. I think like that's a perfect advice to end this amazing talk. Thank you, Ilkka. Thank you, Neil. For our whole audience, thanks for being here and sharing this day together with us. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.